Hello, my name is Tomasz Gruszkowski on behalf of the IFLA Preservation and Conservation Center for Digital Preservation. I would like to welcome you for a webinar by Martiny Hoffmann from the Swiss National Library, who will be talking about preparing a mass digitization project.
Welcome everybody, and thanks for having me today for introduction into mass digitization projects for cultural heritage. Just to make sure that we know who I am, I give you a little slide with some works that I've done. I'm currently head of the Department Digitization at the Swiss National Library, and also I'm the owner of Martiny Hoffmann Consulting, a consulting company for training and digitization projects, including quality assurance for cultural heritage projects in 2D, 3D for all kinds of institutions. I've worked before in the Netherlands, some big projects, mass digitization projects, also with Metamorphosa, that is probably known to a lot of people. With that, I'm just jumping right into the topic. If you want to add me on LinkedIn, you can find my link here. So digitization, what are we talking about if we are talking about digitization at all? In my years of experience, I've discovered that people are really talking about digitization, about different things, and I found only one thing that we can all agree on, and this is what I'm showing on my slide right now. Digitization, when we talk about it, it means something like we have an original material, we have something that we call digitization, and in the end, we will find something that is basically zeros and ones, a digital file. Everything else, in my experience with a lot of institution branches in cultural heritage, we talk about different stuff. But to have common grounds, everybody can agree on this. So what could be original material? Actually, we are talking about objects from different kinds of institutions, like museums, like galleries, like universities, like archives, like libraries, and somebody, and we are not talking about who or why or when, classified it as art and or cultural heritage. So this is the original material we are talking about when we're talking about digitization in cultural heritage. Then what exactly is digitization? Well, actually, digitization, as it's commonly understood, is a conversion process where information from a physical carrier is transferred to a digital carrier. And there are a lot of things that are happening in between, and we are just calling it the conversion process as digitization. So in the end, there will be zeros and ones. And the zeros and ones, the digital file, whatever that is, in which kind of format, for which purpose, it is the final product of the conversion processes. I'm, of course, a quality assurance manager, so for me it's also interesting, is there anything about quality assurance in there? Yes, there is, but we're not talking about this today, because that would be a whole other short course that I could give for you on that. So digitization, what is it exactly? Well, the word is pretty much used for a lot of things, but first and foremost, it's always a conversion from one carrier to another. In our case, it's always analog to digital, and it's most commonly used. Also, digitization as a word is used to describe a process or the basis of a process that has to follow. And also, it's the collective term for from the original into whatever digital use we're talking about. So it's used in many different ways, in many different situations, same word, which makes it also very versatile to use because it's valid for every kind of material, all kind of digitization processes, and it also shows you already we have to take care and make sure we use correct terminology. So when we are talking about digitization today, it means digitization, the conversion from analog to digital, including the basis plus the collective processes that we have for the end use of all the digital products. And we are talking specifically about digitization of cultural heritage. We could even specify it for several projects. We are talking about digitization of cultural heritage in 2D digitization, or in 2D mass digitization, or in mass digitization, or in 3D digitization, or anything else. So you could specify it even better, but to make sure we are talking about digitization of cultural heritage. And as I'm working at a library, my experience from my current occupation is I'm talking about digitization of cultural heritage in 2D on paper material. But anyway, just to show you how hard it could be to actually tell anybody else what we are actually talking about when we're talking about digitization projects, because, well, that could be basically anything. So basics first, we have to get the basics right, and that's why I'm here to tell you something about how a digitization project actually could work for you, for everybody. Basically, when we think of projects, of course, there is project management involved, and I will come to that a little bit later. But if we're talking about digitization projects, there are certain things that are always there. And I'm always showing this in kind of a step ladder because it's very visual. I think it helps a lot. It helped a lot of my projects. It helped a lot of my clients also, and my partners to actually get a mindset of how we would start. And the first thing is we have to think about something that comes at the end, which is kind of controversial, yes, but it makes a lot of sense because the output has to come first. Why? Because when we don't know what we are actually creating, well, what are we actually doing with digitization? So the output has to be defined first. You will hear a lot of problematic questions maybe, but also a lot of things that have to be defined when you're talking about digitization projects. So output. What exactly do we want as output of our digitization project or program or the digitization at all? Whatever we're talking at this point, what is the output? The output could be, for example, something that I can put in a long-term repository. So a digital file format or formats that I can actually preserve in a long-term repository. It could also be that I want output just for web presentation, which means that I am already talking about two different kinds of output. And then I could have any number of output that I actually want and desire for my purpose. So that's the first thing that we need to think about. Then, of course, well, original material. What kind of original material am I talking about? Am I talking about newspapers, for example? Or am I talking about a museum object? Am I talking about unique handwritten material from 1520? Or am I talking about a manuscript from 1890? Or am I talking about millions and millions of newspaper pages from 1900 to 2000? Completely different material. So I need to know and define what kind of material am I going to digitize. Then, of course, the third step is to think about requirements. What kind of requirements do I have to write down to specify for the given circumstance that I have from my output and original material? And of course, then if I have defined everything, I can also define my wishes, the things that I would like to have. I'm always saying the first three steps are really, really necessary for a digitization project. The wishes are actually the nice to haves if I have enough money and time left over. So again, I'm a quality assurance manager. Quality assurance, in my point of view, is a part of a digitization project that is actually making sure that everything goes adhering to those specifications that you wrote up in the basics first. And in your given circumstances. So yes, QA is a part of everything, of the whole process. So just to make this notion at the side. How would I start a digitization project? Well, first of all, I hope we have all some project management classes that I assume we have. But then again, we have to write stuff to get budget. We have to make a plan for money. We have to make a plan for timelines. Basics that adhere to every project, not only to digitalization projects. For digitalization projects, we have way more challenges in the sense that we need to answer first few more questions. Well, actually, a lot more questions, if I'm being honest. So basically, what's your goal? What do you want to achieve? What exactly are we digitizing? How much of it? And of course, how much money do I have? Very, very important question, of course. How much money do I have at all for this project? If I have a large sum amount of money and I have a few objects, then I will probably have a different kind of requirement, or can ask for different kinds of requirements and wishes than if I have little money and a higher volume of originals. So those questions come to the basics of the project. And then, of course, if I have digitization and quality assurance, that I also have to specify what exactly do I have already in-house? What do I need to specify for others, maybe? We can talk about, for example, one-button solution. So I'm just sending out stuff and I'm just clicking on a button and there will be my result. Or do I have an institution with lots of different kinds of materials and I would like to have everything in one digitization workflow? So I need a one workflow solution, maybe. Do I want to have an individual project every time? Do I want to have an individual digitization every time? Or do I want to have something more standardized? Do I need to be very flexible? Or do I only have one kind of material and one kind of a requirement that I'm working with? Do I need to write software with that? Or can I use open source? Am I allowed to use open source? Am I obliged to use open source? Or do I need to specify everything for this project that I have now and be very flexible and individual with that? So it depends also a lot on how your institution works, how much your circumstances differ, and how much your aims and your goals differ with that. Could also be another question, of course, like, can I actually do it in-house or not? But we will come to that later too. So just to make sure that we have the project coming along and the project documentation to set up the idea of a workflow, to set up the idea of a digitization project, we could ask ourselves some questions. I've put a lot of questions in there. I will just pick a few out of there, and I hope that it will help you in the future to set up your own questions. They are not exhaustive at all, but just to give you a hint on the future questions that you could ask yourself or your partners in a digitization project. So when we talk about output, what are we going to produce at all? Are we actually producing preservation images or images for a website? Why is this important? Because when I talk about preservation images, I'm probably talking about archival masters in a high, very heavy file format like a TIFF, for example, or a JPEG 2000 uncompressed and everything. If I have to talk about images for a website, I'll probably want to have some smaller images. Well, of course, very good images, but still smaller images in size, which means I probably have to compress, or I can't use the resolution that I actually would want for a preservation master. So I have to, of course, know for what, for who, for which purpose am I actually digitizing. And also, well, you can have more than one output. You can have the question that you want to actually produce archival masters for preservation and also have images for the website. So basically you could actually say, I have two outputs. How would we specify that? Well, we would say, for example, we want to produce preservation masters, and from that preservation masters, we want to create derivatives for a website presentation or a publication or a poster or whatever you want to do with it. Then there's also this question, for whom are we actually producing it? Very often people tell me, well, I want to just put it on a platform for use. Well, that's okay, but actually what is the use? Who is using it? Is it a researcher who has probably some other needs than a person who is basically just searching on the internet for a hit? In a newspaper, for example, people are often looking for their family trees, and that means that they are citizen scientists or they are just interested parties, but they don't really have a research for a PhD going on. While a PhD researcher wants to know different things from this specific newspaper, they have different needs on what they want to see or how they want to have it presented. And also, there are all kinds of researches, even to what color the newspapers did change over the years. So if you have a newspaper title, for example, people want to know how the paper was used in 1890 and in 1950 and in 2000. So there are lots of questions, for whom are we actually producing, that also go into the requirements that we finally have to specify, of course. Then, for example, are we digitizing for the storage, just to have it digitized? Mostly for conservational reasons, for example, because the paper is in very bad shape or the object is in very bad shape, just to preserve the information that we have now. It's also some kind of different specification that you need for that. Do we do it for future generations, which is very, very hard to actually determine now. So we have to take a close look and really think about what we are actually digitizing. Are we making sure we are getting all the information out of everything for usages of our grandchildren that we don't even know what they will do with it, for example? And of course, what do I want to achieve? And what do I want to achieve goes basically to the notion of how much time and money do I have? Because, well, all the things that we are actually producing cost money and they cost time. And we can be honest, everybody has to face the time and budget challenges. No matter where you are, no matter how big you are, no matter how much money you actually have, those challenges are the same for everything. If you are the Library of Congress, you can't do anything that you want because there are limits on your budgets per year and your time. And also, if you are the Swiss National Library, you have the same challenges. It's not possible to digitize everything. I know a lot of clients, a lot of customers, a lot of patrons really, really, really would like us to digitize everything. It's just simply impossible. So we have to make a decision on what we want to achieve. And that also has to do with, do I have the money? Do I have the time? How much time and money do I have? How much can I achieve? Do I have masses of volumes that I need to digitize now in high quality, which also means I will have to pay the price for that? For example, in newspaper digitization, we have very high volumes to digitize. If we are talking about museums, there is a limited amount of same objects that we can digitize. So we rather talk about low volume, high quality object digitization, because there is only one unique item that I can digitize, for example, of a vase. Or maybe there is a collection of vases that are similar, not the same, but similar objects that I can do, but they don't have millions of pages like you have in a newspaper project, for example. So when I'm already talking about this, then I'm coming to original material. And there we talk about uniformity. Uniformity is very, very interesting for digitization projects in terms of money and time, because the more homogeneous your collection is, the more high volume, standardized ways you can actually ask for and perform, which also means standardized ways normally are faster and cheaper than to have one-of-a-kind digitization. So archives, newspapers, books are, well, all kind of flat items. So you think, well, they are uniform. They are not. They are totally not. So an archival collection normally is very, very different in sizes. If you have letters, you have small envelopes, you have stamps, you have letters that are opened or not, or one single page or more pages. So lots of not uniform items, for example. If you have books, well, they probably vary very much in size and in thickness, but they don't vary a lot in how they are presented to a digitization unit. Newspapers can come also in small sizes if they are very old, in bigger sizes if they are, well, the last 120, 30 years or so. And then you have, of course, the question, are they in a volume or are they just loose newspapers? But they're not exactly that diverse. And then, of course, you have the mixed collections where you have from everything in there. So you have to maybe think about how you would present it logistically to a digitization project. Can you just drop everything there, or can you actually make some workflows with that in order to have more constrained time frame that you are actually doing one kind of object at a time? If you have museum objects, of course, every bets are off. There is no uniformity in museum object collections normally, besides that they are probably classified as there are vases, there are manuscripts, there are letters. And then, of course, the fragility of the objects. Are your objects actually suitable for digitization? Not everything can be digitized. We have to be honest about that too. There's a lot of clients that come to us and say, why don't you have this or this item online? Well, because we sadly have no of those issues that is actually digitizable. We can't do it. It would break. We would destroy the original. And then, well, of course, we don't have the whole digitized object online. Could be. Happens not too often. Luckily for us, lots of objects are very easy handleable. We can actually digitize them. There are ways to digitize them, but sometimes you have to treat them before, which also means, coming from the budget and time frame, if an object needs treatment beforehand in order to be able to be digitized, it means it costs more money and more time. Can I actually do this within my budget and time frame? Very big, interesting question that you have to think about. Or do we have to exclude it for those reasons? And how bad is it? How much do we need this item in there? Or can we find another item that is basically the same, which is often the case for a newspaper, for example. If I don't have a newspaper in my collection, maybe another library has the same newspaper issue in their collection that I can actually borrow for the digitization. This, of course, is not possible if you are talking about unique items. If you have only one vase of a kind, you can't just change it and borrow it from another museum. You have to actually decide, can we do it? Can we not do it? So very important questions, all before we are actually digitizing anything, just to prepare the digitization project at all. And then, of course, once we know what we're actually doing and with what kind of material, we have to decide. And there's this thing that people always tell me, well, you're asking a lot of questions, and I kind of feel my job is actually to ask a lot of questions, because if I don't have the answers, I can't write up my digitalization specification. And I want to tell people it's really, digitization means communication. It means decisions. It means asking a lot of questions to either your partners or to yourself in order to get a good digitalization project started. So more questions that you have to ask yourself or some partners, and don't mistake, there are lots of partners in this whole thing all the time, like the conservation department, the magazine, the logistics, the transportation, insurance, the directors, the higher management, the vendors, service suppliers, whoever, they're all partners in this. You have to ask maybe a lot of questions to them too. So questions that I have based on my output, desired output, of course, and the objects that I'm actually digitizing. What about image quality? Of course, this is the one thing that we are talking about when we talk about quality, which should not be the only thing, but it's the most common thing. So what is image quality? Most of the times people say, I want a good image quality, and then they don't specify what is a good image quality. So what is high quality? What is low quality? Well, high resolution, for example, people tell me, I want high resolution because that's a high quality. No, it's not. Actually, high resolution does not mean anything. I can have an image on 1200 ppi, for example, that I can't even see a pixel on there because it was not in focus. So it does not really specify anything. So we have to look further than this. And then we have, of course, the known usual suspects like FACI, like Metamorphose. They are guidelines that can help you to determine what kind of image quality are you talking about. Actually, even better, we have an ISO standard. ISO 19264-1 is exactly written for cultural heritage digitization on 2D material, for example, and it gives you an international standard on image quality that you can actually just look up, that you can use for your specification, determine which kind of quality level do you want, A, B, or C, for example, and it will give you a workflow, a digitization workflow on the creation of an image, so the actual conversion step, nothing more, just the conversion step, by the way, to have high quality, reliable quality images. And then you can just actually talk about ISO image quality, which makes it way easier to talk about it, by the way. So photographic material is also a question, how would that fit into image quality? Well, if it's photographic material that you can actually look on, which means it's not a negative or a positive that you can see through, which would be classified as transmissive material. So if it's paper-based photographic material, you can actually use the ISO standard, which makes it way easier to talk about and classify, of course, what you actually can ask for it. If you're talking about transmissive material at this point in time, I have to say we don't have ISO standard 19264-2, which will be published in the future and will exactly go about this transmissive material. It will help, for example, if you look into FACI guidelines. Metamorphose can't help you here because it does not say anything about transmissive material. FACI does. It has a section in the guidelines about transmissive material that you could use for that, and then you can refer in your projects to this image quality, of course. And then we, of course, think about museum objects and they are 3D, and then there is this whole notion about what exactly do you want to digitize? Do you want 2D digitization or 3D digitization? And for 3D, there are no standards at all. So it would be very, very hard to determine what the image quality is at this point in time. And you need really a lot of time and competence, knowledge, maybe asking a lot of international experts to write up good specifications for that. But if you're talking about 2D digitization, basically you are covered. Use the ISO standard. You have the transmissive material in FACI. So you got the image quality covered. What about the content quality? This is something that people are really always forgetting, or they're mixing it up with image quality because they are using an ISO standard. The ISO standard says nothing about the content of an image or a digitization project. So still, when I'm saying, well, we are using ISO standard 19264-1 quality level A, B, or C, that's not the whole picture, of course, of the requirement. It does not say if I have 100% completeness of my collection, for example. So I have actually to determine, if I'm talking about the newspaper title, what margin of error is acceptable for me. How many pages can be missed? Because the ISO standard does not say anything about it. It will say anything about how high the resolution should be, for example, or what the delta E of the color is. But it does not say anything about how many pages could be missed. I have to think about that myself. And I have to determine what is acceptable and why I'm so much into the acceptable. Because, well, if you're talking to archivists and librarians, well, I want everything, of course. Well, yes, you do want everything. But first of all, can you actually control that you have everything? Which means that you would need to do a one-on-one quality assurance, which costs a lot of time and effort. And when you're talking about digitization projects with probably 100 objects, you can actually do it. If you're talking about a digitization project with 1 million pages, you can't do it, because probably you don't have the personnel resources to do that, which means, well, you have to make a trade-off. And the second very important thing, digitization is done by humans, and every human makes mistakes. We all do that. And there is no guarantee for 100% quality, even though often service suppliers would say that they still can make mistakes, because also there are only humans doing the digitization. So think beforehand, what would be acceptable? Maybe not 100%, but close to. And also something that I find very interesting is the discussion about what exactly is the content. Is the content the object, or is it the text? In our point of view, is the object the thing that I would actually see if I want it in the reading room. That would be the object. The text is, of course, the very interesting content of the object, but it's the second level content, actually, that I want to see, that I want to digitize. I also want the whole object, not only the text. And, of course, something that is very, very common for librarians and archivists, the digital files have to somehow relate back to the original material. And how would we actually specify this, first of all? And how can we control that it actually is relating back to the original? And also there, lots of times humans are there that make mistakes. How much is acceptable? If one page does not exactly relate back to the original material, is it still, can you still find it? I don't know. Everybody has to actually find those answers for themselves. There are lots of ways on how to do this, and lots of different views on how much content quality you can ask, you want to ask. If you are in a museum and you have 10 vases, you can actually do 10 vases 100%, but then you have to have the personnel resources in-house to actually control that you have them, or to do it yourself and make sure you have no mistake in there. So basically, it also very much depends on what kind of objects and what kind of output do you want. And then, of course, the requirements for the long term. If you have long-term repositories that you want to put your digital files in, how are you making sure that the digital files are secured? probably, and there it goes back to communication with your partners, either your IT department, very, very important partner in digitalization projects, the IT department, or the long-term repository department, whichever has every name that I can think of: preservation managers, digital archive managers, those people that are working for the long-term repository in whatever department in your institution. They should help you specify the requirements for that. And also, they have the knowledge normally how you need to specify the best practices for this long-term repository, because they maybe don't want just an image file. They need some metadata file with it, because otherwise they can't make sure that the long-term repository is actually keeping it safe. Depends very much on how this is used, which software is used for the digital archive, what the whole thing is built up, and how often they have their required settings there changing. Depends a lot. You have to ask questions, because probably you, as I, don't know everything about this. I also have to ask my colleagues in the Swiss National Library what exactly do they want, and then I can specify it in my digitalization project. And then, of course, you have some kinds of wishes. You can ask for anything else. And I always say, well, if I have some money and time left, then I'm asking this for my service suppliers. Like, how would I want them to digitize? Which kind of access copies do I want? What kind of capacity of the hard drives do I want? What kind of file formatting do I want? Whatever. So lots of different kinds of wishes. And then you have to, of course, the one big internal, external question. So do you have internal digitization studio, digitization unit, practice, everything? Or do you have to give your volumes externally to a service supplier? The Swiss National Library does do both. We have internal and external digitization, but if we're talking about mass versus studio, it's clear mass digitization will be done externally. Like our newspapers, we do millions of pages in a year, so we are not able to do it in-house. We are doing it with external service suppliers. We are also doing few things internally in our studio, mainly for items that we are not allowed to send out to external vendors, which is basically a common practice in all kinds of institutions. Unless you are not allowed to send out anything, then you have to do everything internally. But that will also mean it will take more time and probably more cost than in a specialized service bureau. Of course, it's different in a museum versus in a library and archive. It's also from the specifications, but also very much differing from the objects that we are doing. And in a studio, most museums have studios. They have also to do studio photography for product placement in their catalogs. They have to do conservation photography and everything like that we are not normally doing in mass digitization projects for libraries and archives. So there is also this notion for purpose-driven digitization, for conservation treatment, for cataloging, for just online presentation, or for archival masters in a long-term repository. Lots of different things that you have to think about when you're starting your digitization project. And then you have these decision points that you have now finally answered mainly all your questions. Now you can actually start. And when you decide if you want to do it in-house or externally, I'm just putting out some questions on this slide. Can I do it in-house? Do I have the equipment? Do I have the people to actually do it in-house? And do I have the competence? And then I have to say, again, if you are doing very large volumes, masses on masses of digitization objects, you could probably end up spending more money if you do it internally than if you would do it externally. So maybe you could think about, is it really necessary to do it myself in-house? But if you're talking about smaller volumes or unique items that you are not allowed for several reasons to send out, one of them, for example, is insurance, then you could probably do it better in-house. And just to give you some few notions on, because I'm a quality assurance manager, why it is important to specify everything. Well, it's important to specify everything up front before you start, because otherwise your output will only be as good as your input, and you could end up like the picture that I'm showing here, with a specification that was not written well, and now you have half of the text at least that is covered by a hand, which is a very interesting, pretty hand, but still probably not the object that you wanted to show online. And also talking about quality assurance even more, I'm just showing a real picture of an archival master here that is actually pretty okay if you just take a look at it this way, and then it could still, with all the best specifications that you wrote, if you then think quality assurance is not necessary, I want to show you think twice, because there is a mistake in here. And I don't know if you can see it already, but there is a doubling in the letters, which is something that nothing will prevent. It could happen. It could happen due to a person that took the wrong timing when they did the digitization. It could also happen because there was a fault in the machine. It could happen also very different kinds of mistakes. But no matter how good your project documentation, your specification is, it could happen, and it will only be shown by a visual control, which means you still have to do quality control. You still have to find a way to actually look at a few images. There are ways for that, and you can find mistakes. Even if there are only few, you can help the quality of your project. And to say that, digitization projects are 90% communication, good specifications, and 2/3 of the project time should be calculated for preparation works of your original and your digitization workflows. And then in the end, you will find only very few, very subtle mistakes, and hopefully none. And to leave it all off, I will just leave you here some tips and tricks for digitization projects that I found very useful for my partners and my kind of line of work in the last more than 10 years. First of all, you don't know everything, because it's impossible to know everything in this highly specialized work. So there are a few experts out there that are actually offering help. So just ask them. It's completely okay. I mean, I'm in this field for almost 15 years now or so, maybe even longer, I don't even know. And I'm still finding things that surprise me almost every week. So also, if I don't know what it is, I'm just asking for a second opinion, and I'm just asking help. If you don't know or are not used to specify specifications in this kind of technical world, ask some help. There are lots of people out there that can actually help you. If you're doing it internally, be aware where you are actually creating stuff, because surroundings will have a big impact on your image quality. Also, something that I have to say, because it's cautioning and it's very important. Yes, there is a lot of automation, and no, artificial intelligence will not help you with that. But automation is great. It just can't be used on everything. Like automation on certain parts of the workflow in quality assurance is great, but it won't help you in the visual inspection, because a software won't see the mistakes that I just showed you before. It can't. It's impossible for a software to be programmed to find this. It can help you with checksums with everything else, or lots of things, but not with everything. So be just aware that it will be kind of a complex process to set up a project, to answer a lot of questions. There is a lot of expectation from everybody to make everything, and it's probably not happening. So there's a lot of expectation management for digitization project manager, lots of communication, lots of partners, and it can be very overwhelming. But there is a great support network out there from experts that you can just ask for help. And with that, I just want to make sure I'm there. Thank you very much. And if you need anything, you find my contact here.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you, Martina, for the presentation. And I have a couple of questions for you, if that's okay.
All right.
Okay, first of all, how is the weather in Bern?
Very cold, and it's dark outside. It was not very good weather for the last couple of days.
Okay, good that we are inside. And okay, I'll shoot a question about automation. You did say that it cannot solve the quality problems. Do you mean the artificial intelligence as well? Do you include it into automation? And if not, is there any other solution? Maybe crowd quality control. Some institutions are posting their digitization results on Flickr or some other site and using the crowd input to improve the metadata?
Yes, well, I think we have to go back to define what kind of quality we would want to control. So if you say automation can help you with everything that you can actually program. For example, if you want to check the quality of your transport of digital files, you have very commonly hashes with checksums, and you can just automatically read them out, control them. No problem at all. You have, if you follow the ISO standard 19264, for example, a workflow with image quality targets that you can actually measure with software. You can also make some automation there. What I exclude in the quality control automation workflow is visual control, because a software won't tell you if it's right or wrong. Like the example that I showed in the presentation with the doubling of the letters, how would a software determine that this letter is not there in the original? So that's what I would exclude from the automation, and also from artificial intelligence in this way, because how will we train, or how can artificial intelligence learn that it's not in the original? We can't give artificial intelligence the original to determine if the digital file is wrong there. So that's very, very difficult. You can't program it, and also there is not enough training material for machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I exclude that always from the automation part, and everything else you could probably do with automation. For the crucial part of the visual control, you actually need humans wherever. I mean, you can do it internally, but you can also do, like you suggested, crowd control. The thing is, when do you want to have the control? When it's online already, when you need to change the whole picture, go back to the original, take it out of the box or of the whatever where it is and remake the whole process? Or do you want to have the visual control at a point in time where you can actually reshoot the original? And that's kind of the thing. So you have to define what part of quality control you're talking about, and if you're only talking, or only, it's not like only, but the metadata is not as crucial part. You would not need the original or another digitization, a picture of it, or a reshooting of the original in order to correct or get better metadata about it.
Okay, that basically answers my question that it's not really feasible to get the crowds to control the digitization quality in the sense of looking at the pictures themselves. Okay, you said a lot. I could try to sum it up that in order to make mass digitization projects, you need knowledge, expertise, money, and quite a few other assets. Is there a rule of thumb that you would use in deciding if it really makes sense for an institution to start thinking about a digitization project, especially mass digitization projects, except for the fact that everyone else is doing it, so why don't we?
Yeah, that's very complicated question. There is no real rule of thumb because you have smaller and bigger institutions. If you are like a national library, it definitely makes sense. I mean, no matter which national library. If you are a big museum, it definitely makes sense. If you're a national archive or a regional archive even, it would make sense. I think it makes sense for every institution to start thinking about a digitization strategy. Like not starting about, do we have mass digitization, or do we need a program, do we need a project, but to think even broader and determine, do we have a need for digitization, and if there is a need for digitization, even though maybe it's motivated by everybody else is doing it, why are we doing it? Is it possible? Do we need it? And how would we do this strategy policy? And from there on, when you're thinking about, I have, I don't know, 100,000 objects that are completely unique and I want to digitize them, you actually already have a mass digitization project, even though it's a very complicated one because you have one-of-a-kind objects. And if you are talking about, you have a huge newspaper archive, then probably you are also talking about a mass digitization project. But if you only have like one newspaper title, then you only have a project. When you are an institution like a university library, you probably have lots of titles that would also make a mass digitization program possible. So there are different kinds of levels that you can think of, but I would actually recommend everybody to just start with an overall digitization strategy for the institution that will determine if we want it, in which options do we want it, what kind of objects do we actually have, and in which time frame are we talking about it? Because time is also relevant for determining how mass is.
Okay. Lighter question, maybe? A camera or a scanner? Silly
Was that the easier question?
No, I'm kidding. I know it's not easier. But what I really meant was, is it only the matter of what do you have when you decide on that? Or, yeah, why?
Do you want to buy?
Yeah.
Or do you want to just give it to an external vendor?
Yeah, that's another issue. Yeah. Do we want to start digitizing and have an in-house lab, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, in some countries it's probably not possible to use external labs because there is no market for that yet. And
True.
Yeah. So you decide to have an in-house lab.
Okay. So you want to buy hardware for your own digitization unit in your own institution. Let's first start. How much money do you have? This is a very important factor if you're looking at scanners or cameras.
That's my next question.
Okay. Well, then let's first try to answer this one. I always try to think about when I have a digitization strategy, you know, then I can also determine what kind of objects do I have. Do I only have one kind of object, like newspapers that I'm talking about, or bound volumes, books? They're all in the size of, let's say, A3, A2, something like that. What kind of hardware would be able to give me ISO 19264 level B? Because that's what I determined. And I would just look for hardware that can actually do that. And then you have a very broad range of hardware that can actually provide that in a certain price range. And then you can choose how much money do you have, what kind of hardware do you buy. If you have a very diverse original frame and you say, well, I have unique, very, very small items. I have transmissive material. I have very large material. I have bound volumes. I have papers that are just papers running around. I have letters. I have handwritten material. I want to do everything. Then you need a very flexible hardware, which means, as you recognize, I'm always thinking from the original, and then I'm choosing what fits best. You maybe don't get a perfect fit, but you can actually do quite a lot of stuff with when you are looking at what kind of originals, with what kind of specifications for the output do I want. And most of the times it's also a competence thing. Generally speaking, it's easier to handle things with a scanner because they are there is not so much you can determine in the software, let's put it this way, and also they come with a lot of integrated stuff that you can't change, like there is this light integrated, there is this optics integrated, you have the table integrated, it's just this one big thing. And it's pretty heavy, it's pretty stable, so nothing's happening with it during the day. If you have a camera on the other side, there is lots of things that you can change, which means you are very, very flexible, but also you need competence and maybe experience to actually handle it. Like, how would I set the light? Where do I have to put the light? Where do I have to put the camera? Do I have to put it high? Do I have to put it low in order to get the quality and the resolution that you determined for this object? Which kind of table? Is it with glass? Is it without glass? And also the software to actually handle stuff with a camera is way more complicated. You have to determine what's the exposure time, what is this time, what is this button and this button. So it's also kind of what do you want, or what is your preference? Do you want to have just a system that is fixed more or less, or very flexible but very easy to interrupt system? Like, for example, one of the things that happens quite often, which is kind of funny, but still it's something true from real world experience. If you have a camera system with lights on the side, and you have a camera and table and everything like that, and there is a cleaning lady or a guy coming in, and they just get with their broom next to the light, and the light is completely off. That won't happen with a scanner. So there is just some practical issues too for that.
Well,
and
scanners often have glass, and then they want to clean the glass with their...
True. True. So both of them should or could have glass, but that's I mean that's really some things that you have to see what you want and how much in practical work you can do with that.
Okay.
So it's not an easy question to answer.
And you did it very well. Did you say it depends in the end, or am I wrong?
Well, it depends on a lot of things, yes.
Okay, no, I'm just kidding, because last week when we had a webinar with Don Williams, he well, he did answer that depends a few times, so I think that it really depends.
It actually does.
Yeah, doesn't make life easier. A very short question, which is probably very difficult. Can you trust the salesman?
No.
No, okay. That was an easy one.
Yeah, and a very short answer.
Yeah, there was a huge problem with the cars, with the German make of a diesel car, which had a system for reducing the emission of the toxic fumes, and that system could determine that it was being tested, and it went to the lower emission mode then. Did you notice something similar in scanners? Like you can use the targets for determining how good quality is a scanner, or a camera for that matter. Do you think the software in the machines is already smart enough to decide that, oh, I'm being given a target to test my quality, so I'm going to improve?
No, the software is not as intelligent. If it would be, I would get better results.
Oh, okay. I'll share some files with you, because I've been getting some incredible results from a make that does not seem that good. Anyway. Okay, totally different subjects. I stay with the quality, but is there some kind of a mismatch between the best possible quality of images and best possible results of optical character recognition? Do they match? I mean, I think that they do not, but I would like to hear what's your opinion on that.
I do see that it matches, actually. It's, if you, well, I'm talking about creation of archival masters according to an ISO standard that is specified, that is also tested and controlled in a workflow, then I'm getting very, very good results with OCR too. The question that you could ask yourself is, do I need a derivative for the presentation on my website anyway, because you probably don't want to load very heavy TIFFs on there, that you can actually enhance, for example, in order to get even better OCR results, which is a very common way to do it. So you have an archival master, which is a pretty heavy, completely controlled file, but it's, well, very heavy, and you, well, don't want that on your websites and on your platforms, of course. So what we would, or what I would advise people then is to just have the archival master as is for the long-term repository, because you don't want to digitize everything twice, 3 times, or even more times. And then if you think that your OCR quality is not good enough, which is also very, well, today the programs that are doing that are really, really great. They have a hit rate of at least 95 to 98%. So you only get a little bit the tweaking of even better results. It's not that much of a room above. Then you can also decide, well, I make a derivative and enhance it, for example, in contrast. And then it will give you maybe a little bit of better results in the OCR. But there is not a lot of room to improve anymore.
Okay. That was, yeah, exactly. You understood my question better than I asked it.
Thank you.
Well, my bad. Anyway, it's now comes the million-dollar question. How about that? So you have $1 million. What would be a very rough split between the various parts of the project? I mean, starting with the strategy and ending with putting up the derivatives on the website, not including the cost of the website itself.
I have $1 million. I would write the strategy as soon as possible, buy the best equipment that can give me the most flexible thing that I can find on the market, and then digitize the collection and put it online and have some kind of digital storage. But I would actually lobby for somebody else to pay for the long-term repository.
Exactly, yes, that's what, well, we've been lucky to have that in Poland with the project of building a national repository for the publicly financed digitization project. I hope it works. It's just starting. But it's really that part of the digitization machine that it's not working 100% yet. Nobody thinks about well, some people do think about the future, but a lot of projects just miss the long-term archivization component, yes.
That is an international thing, I think. That's just, it's not new, but I hear it very, very often from my clients too, that they are just producing for presentation purposes, and then they have tons of files that they don't know how to keep for the long term. And that's also why I'm proposing always to actually create preservation masters with an ISO standard, for example. You have a completely controlled workflow. You have all the documentation. So the archiving of all these files is very easy for any kind of IT component, and the long term for the future. And then when you have created archival masters, you can create as many, on the fly even, derivatives that you want or need for any kind of purpose. Which is kind of another thing to think about, is that you can actually, if you are now specifying, I just want a presentation on the web with a little tiny JPEG, for example, whenever you need something that is actually printed in a high quality, you just need to go back and need to redigitize it. Once you create an archival master, you don't need to go back and redigitize it. You can just create another derivative.
Okay. Do I have any more questions? Do you have any questions to yourself? I don't think I...
tons.
Yeah, well, ask, answer.
No, I want to give people the chance to ask me.
I don't see any questions in chat, actually, so I hope some questions can come. And are there any questions in chat? Not really.
People are just blown away.
Yes, I guess it would be nice to ingest your presentation again, because you were quite energetic in it. And yeah, some people might have been blown away. I hope the translators were not.
I hope so too.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that, yeah, I am looking for the questions and I don't see the questions anymore.
Well, in the meantime, maybe I can just tell something completely different, because I'm shamelessly plugging something here. There is a huge community, as I said, for support also, and also great conference that is actually addressing all those topics. Like Don Williams, you mentioned him before. He is also part of the community and also gives short courses and papers on this conference. It's the ISNT archiving community. And there is an upcoming conference next year. It's a yearly conference that you can maybe look at, but also every month there is a grab a cup. It is in English, I have to say, but still it's an international open free Zoom meeting. There you can just send your email address to the invitation list, which will be then send out an invitation for each first week of the month to just get together and talk about topics. Sometimes we have arranged for topics. Sometimes we are just talking about stuff that comes up. And if you don't have enough of me and my green hair already, then I can tell you I will be the host of all of those. I'm doing this every month and everybody is invited to join in.
Okay. By the way, do you have access to the chat on the site?
I think I do.
If you do, why don't you put a link in there? And in the meantime, I'll just say that the recordings of the 3 webinars will be put online, and the link is in the chat already. And all the versions will be there, both English and Polish. So if you don't have enough of Martina Hoffmann, Don Williams, and my friend Andrzej Daniluk, you can watch the webinars online. I think this week we will put the files and the links online. The link is there, and I think that the first link Martina is putting is there already. I'll just put it in the Polish or English version. Okay.
Yeah, and it's really, I think that the most important thing is to just think about everything, and if you have questions, don't be afraid to ask them. I think that's the most common thing, is that people in institutions are not asking their peers. Like, I mean, you're in the National Library in Poland, and I'm in the National Library in Switzerland, and there are people in the National Library of Austria or in the Library of Congress in America, and we all have experience, and as long as we share it and we find each other, I think we can help make digitization of cultural heritage better and better, and we will achieve way more when we are doing it together.
Yes, I guess you're 100% right. So if there are questions, well, you can see my email. You can send questions to my email and I'll pass them to Martina. You can send questions to Martina because you can find her on LinkedIn. And, well, there's a question on the chat.
Really? Cool.
What was the most challenging, complex digitization project you participated in?
Whew. I think it was a combined project that I did for Metamorphose in the Netherlands, at least that I started it, because I went from the Netherlands to Switzerland right when it was in production. But now it's online already, and it was a digitization of an archive, like a very easy, actually, paper archive, some meters, and the really challenging part was 1.6 meters broad by 6 meter long drawings of church windows. So not the actual, what the architects or the artists actually wanted to make as a church window, which means that they are really, really, really big, and they were rolled up. So they came in rolls, and well, how would you get that flat enough for a archival master and in this size? This was very challenging, so we had to find ways to unroll them and make them flat and then transport them. But then for the transport, of course, they have to be rolled up because, well, that's another problem. And it was very challenging to get them to a digitization party that actually had equipment that could do such large items without stitching, which is something that, of course, is used very often, but it's also very time and personnel intensive work, and there can go thousand things can go wrong with stitching. So you want actually to have it in like one roll, one scan, and we actually managed to find somebody who could do it on a very high quality with a specialized scanner, and that was, I think, one of the most challenging. And the other things that are probably very challenging are shiny materials, every kind of shiny materials, metal stuff that is found in between paperwork and everything like that. And then the sheer mass of my very first project in the Netherlands, which was Images of the Future, 1.2 million photographs and negatives in 1.5 years, digitized and put online, which was the sheer mass and the logistics nightmare in the beginning, before we ended up with a really smooth working machine that was set up, and then it rolled through and we finished it in time, on point, everything was fine, but it was very challenging.
Within budget?
Within budget, yes.
Yeah, there's a Polish saying that you can do things well, cheap, and on time, but not all three at the same time. You can only choose two of them.
Yeah, I think that is
perfect.
Well, it was not cheap.
Okay.
But they had the budget.
Not on budget. Well, that's almost cheap. I'll say.
That's the thing with if you have a strategy and a project plan upfront, then you already know that you will pay a sum, and you can actually lobby for that sum of money, instead of getting, well, here you have 50,000 euro, whatever, and then you have to do it for that money. Mm. That's also why I'm saying, actually, my biggest work is upfront, before I even have a project, to think everything through, and then I'm going to my manager and say, well, we can do this project, we can do those million pages, but I need this money. Mm.
And then he says, sure, Martina, go ahead. Anyway, I did put 3 links to the digitization standards, which are, I guess, all 3. Are there any others? Yes, probably there are, but these are available in English, which is, I would say, it's the international language of digitization. And they are, 2 of them are available free of charge, because they have been prepared for some public institutions. The third one, the ISO norm, is you have to pay for it, but well, it's an international norm, so that's cool. The other 2 are quite aged. I've heard from the Dutch digitization expert, Hans van Dormolen, that he is working on the 2nd version of Metamorphose, the Dutch standard, but it's not ready yet. I've heard from Don Williams, the American expert on digitization, that they are working on the new version of the federal agency's digitization guidelines, but it's not there yet. And that brings me to the question, what's the time span that you can work with thinking about the quality? The ISO standard is a couple of, well, 5 months old. So I guess it's new, it's fresh, it's cool. But Fudgy is 5 years old, and the Metamorphose 1.0 is something like almost 10 years old. So
yeah, so there's a little bit of history in that. Metamorphose and Fudgy are no standards. It's very important to state that they are guidelines, which means you are. No, that's very common. Everybody says it's a standard, but actually, if you look at how you can use it, it's not, because both of them give you a lot of help, and they give you a hand, but they don't. You can't enforce it. If you have, for example, like I have a lot of experience with external vendors, with external service suppliers, and you have specified, well, it's the guideline Metamorphose 1.0, then they will say, yeah, but it doesn't specify this. And you didn't specify it either. So there's a lot of discussion room that you probably don't want to have. And also they say, yeah, well, you know, it's a guideline. It just says, okay, then it should be that, but it doesn't say you have to have this or that value. And this is very important to understand. If you're specifying something with a guideline, you can have these discussions. Whether when you are using an ISO standard, it's an ISO standard, an International Standards Organization approved thing, that you don't have any or not a lot of wiggle room in there. So, Metamorphose is very old, 1.0. It will. I've heard rumors about 2.0 for the last 6 years. I don't think it will happen in the next 3 years that we have a version 2.0. And for the FACI guidelines, they started, of course, with 2010 version, and the 2010 version was very unpractical. Let's put it this way. It was hard to read, and then 2016, the new version was very practical. Actually, everybody could read it. But, as you said, there is America, there is the Netherlands, and people always had a feeling that there is a competition in there or something else. It is actually not a competition. They both were part of creating the ISO standard. The ISO standard didn't came out of nothing. The working group that is actually putting the ISO standard together has a lot of parties in there. Also, the FACI people and the Metamorphose people. So they worked together, and actually it merged all to the ISO standard. So the ISO standard is the best of all worlds. And now, if they are talking about version 2.0 or FACI, I don't know, 2022, 23, whatever, they are actually updating the old versions to include the ISO standard. Which means also you can just use the ISO standard in my point of view.
Okay. So that's clear, yes. Targets.
Yeah.
Tell me something about targets. What do you use?
What do you want to know? Well, in Switzerland, we are using different kinds of targets for different kinds of machines and purposes, of course.
That depends.
It depends, of course. We are introducing device-level targets, calibration targets, and object-level targets on all levels. I am actually using in the Swiss National Library a lot of UTT targets as device-level targets. That's the universal test targets in different sizes, of course. And that's for hardware monitoring, so to see how the hardware is calibrated in a daily production. If it adheres to the ISO level standard tolerances and everything like that. We are using internally, for example, also UTT targets, but also FACI 19264 targets. We are also using the color checker digital SG, but we are calibrating and color profiling, for example, with the next generation targets, which are specially created for cultural heritage usage. And of course, if we are talking unique material, handwritten material, object level targets in all kinds of sizes, you can have them as scanner reference chart, they are called, or as object level target family, they are called. So you can buy a lot of stuff in there. In the Netherlands, we've also used slanted edges, Q862 targets. We have used Q82 RPM targets. We have used digital color checker SG targets. And also, of course, if you just want to see how your light is performing and if you have any problems on your on the whole thing that you are actually capturing, then you should just use a white sheet of paper or a black gray sheet of paper in order to determine how even your light is distributed or if there are any artifacts that you would see in your originals then.
Geometric distortion?
QA RPM H targets.
Okay, you've done your homework, definitely. I'll be talking to you about webinar on targets. Why don't we do it, say, beginning of spring?
Okay.
That would be, yeah, it would be really cool to have some meeting offline because, yeah, your home office is cool, but it would be difficult to have the presentation of the way of using the different targets for quite unpractical, I would say.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and I would love to come over and do it on site.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so that's a deal, definitely.
Okay.
Do we have? No. Okay. Is this a question? There is a question mark at the end of some long piece of text, and it's a question. Okay. Do you think it is worth to deploy very specialized, customized scanning solutions, like in your case of window drawings, of course, if the budget allows for it, or if there is not enough money, wait for the scanning technology development and price drops?
I would say it depends on the volume that you want to digitize. If you do all this effort for 100 pieces, it probably is not worth the money and the time and the effort that you are putting in there. If you can create a machine that is actually usable for mass, like thousands, 10,000s, millions of pages or objects, it's absolutely worth developing something.
Well, I thought that they did make a one-off machine in the Dutch National Museum for digitizing the Night Watch by Rembrandt, but they have a budget for that, I think.
In the Rijksmuseum, but it was also a very sponsored project. You know, they got sponsored by Axo Nobel to actually do this because they were very interested in one-of-a-kind questions for research, like what kind of pigments, what's behind the painting. They did a 3D scanning, 2.5D scanning. They did infrared. They did like everything. That is, we call it more or less scientific imaging. It's something for a different purpose that you have one-of-a-kind with interesting questions about this one piece. When we are talking about digitization, like we are doing it for preservation, it's more or less, I think, the plain basic 2D digitization. But of course, if we're talking about manuscripts and stuff like that, we can also talk about multispectral imaging, for example, and then we immediately go into what's the difference between hyper and multispectral, and if you have a 3D object, which is basically every book would be a 3D object already. You can already make 3D scans of books. How would we do that? You can a little bit describe it like, you know, the Dead Sea Scroll, for example, is a one-of-a-kind thing. You don't want to destroy it, and you can't really scan into it. So what they did was very expensive CT tomography scanning with it, and then they actually programmed software that can work through the layers in order to make a visual digital version that you can roll out, which is probably okay for this kind of object, but you don't want to do that in mass because it would blow up all your budget.
That brings me the 3D scanning of books. Let's skip it. No 3D yet, but traditional 2D scanning, but of some very nice objects, say 16th century book with some nice watermarks and a very nice cover made of leather with gold leaf inlays. how do you approach that? It's not mass digitization anymore?
Well, it kind of is, because the text itself will be, well, the same as any other archive. You probably have some special handling requests, like the transportation, the insurance, but also that you don't break the cover, or that you have all the details of the cover. If you're talking like newspaper digitization, probably nobody actually digitizes the cover when you have bound volumes of newspapers. I mean, it makes no sense, but with really, okay, we don't. We're only interested in the newspaper itself. but if you have a book with a nice cover that you also want to digitize the cover, of course, actually, the cover would not be anything else than a text, because with the ISO standard, if you have a controlled workflow, you are creating an archive master that gives you all the information that the camera can determine that would be there. So if it's a really nice leather cover, or if it's parchment, or if it's just a plain white sheet of paper with printed text on it, the camera doesn't care. It gives you the best result that you can have. With gold leaves, there you have a little bit of a problem, because it reflects very badly with your setup, of course. So if you want to have that, you would use a striking light. You could make two digital files for the same page, for example, to have it one in your current workflow, just a mass digitization. So you do the book as it is, and you get everything else. And then you have this special paper with gold leaves on it, or the special thing with a relief on there with letters. Sometimes you have, it's not flat, you have something on there or in there. Then you could make another, or that's what we would probably suggest to do, or what I advise my customers, to make another shot of the same thing with raking light, striking light, or a completely different setting. But you can minimize the effort if you just do the things that you can do in your mass workflow with the REST workflow.
Okay, thank you. Do we? No more questions? Unless there is a question in the Polish chat. No questions in the Polish chat. So that's a question for the interpreters. Okay. I can think of no more questions for the moment. So
okay.
If there is no more questions in the chat, and there are not, I would like to thank you very, very much for your patience, because we met on Monday the 6th, and we finished the webinar on Wednesday the 15th, which was probably the longest ever webinar. With short breaks, but thank you very much, Martina. And
thank you, Tomasz.
I welcome everyone to re-watch the webinars on our website. And I guess in a couple of months, we'll be inviting you for a next webinar. The subject is not set yet. If you have any questions, you can drop me an email, and I'll try to get the answer. And well, that's I guess that's it, probably. So.
Well, then I have to thank you very much, Tomasz, for the invitation, for the opportunity to present here, and also for your great questions. It was my pleasure to be here, and if you need another topic, webinar, please let me know. And if there are questions, please forward them to me. Or if people look me up, of course, you can also just chat with me directly on my mail.
Cool. Okay. Thanks
Thank you very much.
Thank you.